This is Miss Boo.
I know exactly how this sounds, and that's why I haven't told anybody about it. Not the police, not my family, nobody. Because if I actually say this out loud to another person, then I have to accept that it really happened, and I honestly don't think I'm ready for that. My wife, Claire, died 3 years ago in a car accident during a storm. Heavy rain, bad visibility, a pileup on the highway. By the time I got there, the paramedics had already covered the car. One of the officers told me not to look underneath the tarp, but I did anyway. I still wish I hadn't. After that, my life kind of stopped feeling real. I went through the motions for a while. Went to work, came home, drank more than I should have. Pretended I was handling things better than I actually was whenever people checked on me. Eventually, everybody stopped asking. But there was one thing I never stopped doing. Every night at exactly 8:32 p.m., I would look toward the front door. Claire always came home from work at 8:32, every single night without fail. I don't know why my brain held on to that specific routine so hard, but even years later I still found myself expecting to hear her keys in the hallway around that time. It became automatic. Last night, at exactly 8:32 p.m., somebody knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. At first, I actually laughed because the timing freaked me out a little. I thought maybe it was a delivery driver at the wrong address or some neighborhood kid messing around outside. I remember checking the clock before I even got up. 8:32. Then I looked through the peephole, and my entire body froze. Claire was standing on the porch. She was wearing the same dark coat she always wore to work, and her hair looked damp from the rain, exactly the way it used to whenever she came home during storms. She even had the same black handbag hanging from her shoulder. For a few seconds, my brain genuinely stopped working. I just stood there, staring through the peephole while every memory I'd spent 3 years trying to bury came flooding back all at once. Then she smiled at me. It wasn't creepy or exaggerated, it was just her normal smile. "You're taking forever," she said through the door. That completely shattered me because those were her exact words. Every time I took too long opening the door for her, she would laugh and say, "You're taking forever." I don't even remember unlocking the deadbolt. One second I was standing there frozen, and the next she was already walking into the house past me like she had just come home from a completely ordinary day at work. I noticed wet footprints trailing behind her across the hardwood floor. I started crying almost immediately. Not screaming or panicking, just crying like something inside me finally cracked after holding itself together for years. I asked her where she'd been. Claire looked confused for a moment and then gave me this small, tired smile. "At work," she said quietly. "Where else would I be?" God help me, part of me wanted to believe her so badly. Because at first, everything about her felt real. Her voice sounded normal. The way she moved around the kitchen felt normal. She tucked her wet hair behind her ear the same way she always used to while opening the fridge. But after a few minutes, little things started feeling wrong. Nothing obvious, just tiny things that slowly got harder to ignore. Sometimes she would pause for a little too long before answering simple questions. Sometimes her smile would come a second too late, like she was remembering when she was supposed to react. I also realized she barely blinked at all. The longer I watched her, the more it felt like I was watching somebody imitate my wife instead of actually being her. Close enough to fool almost anyone, but not close enough to fool me. Then she suddenly stopped moving, completely stopped. She was staring toward the hallway mirror across from the kitchen. At first, I thought she was looking at her own reflection, but after a second, I realized she wasn't looking at herself. She was staring at me, or more specifically, at something behind me. "Claire?" I asked. She didn't answer me. She just kept staring over my shoulder with this terrified expression I had never seen on her face before, not even during the worst moments of our marriage. Then she quietly asked, "Who's standing behind you?" I turned around so fast I almost slipped on the floor. The hallway was empty. When I looked back at her, she looked even more afraid than before. Her eyes were filling with tears, but she still wouldn't stop staring at the space behind me. Then she whispered something that I still can't stop thinking about. "Don't let it learn your face." The kitchen lights dimmed for maybe a second, just dimming, like the entire house blinked, and Claire suddenly took a step backward away from me. Away from me. "No," she whispered quietly. Then louder, panicking now. "No, no, no, no." That was when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow footsteps moving across the hardwood floor. Just slow, deliberate movement, like somebody circling the kitchen. Every time I turned around, there was nothing there. Claire started crying while staring into the darkness behind me. Real crying. Terrified crying. "It followed me," she whispered. I think that was the moment I finally understood what was happening. Claire wasn't the thing pretending. Claire was real, and whatever had come back with her was standing somewhere behind me in the dark. The hallway suddenly looked wrong somehow. Too dark, even with the kitchen lights on, like the darkness itself had depth to it. Claire looked at me one last time with tears running down her face and whispered, "I tried not to let it see you." Then every light in the house went out. Everything went completely black. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing. Then I heard footsteps moving through the kitchen again. Slow, heavy. I grabbed my phone and turned the flashlight on. The kitchen was empty. Claire was gone. The back door stood open, with rain blowing inside. Wet footprints led out into the yard, but there was another set of footprints beside them, longer, distorted somehow, and they stopped directly behind the exact spot where I had been standing the entire time. Like something had spent the whole conversation inches behind my back, silently watching both of us. I didn't sleep at all last night. I sat in the living room with every light in the house turned on because I was too afraid to look into any dark room for more than a few seconds. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be some explanation for everything. Grief, stress, alcohol, some kind of breakdown, anything. But tonight, at exactly 8:32 p.m., somebody knocked again. 3 slow knocks. I froze the second I heard it. Then I heard Claire crying softly on the other side of the door. And just before I almost unlocked it, I heard her whisper, "Please, don't let it in again."
I woke up in my childhood bedroom sometime in the afternoon, and the first thing I remember thinking was that my mother must have cleaned it recently. Nothing had moved. The old soccer posters were still hanging above the desk, even though the corners had started peeling years ago. My bookshelf still had the same cracked fantasy novels I used to read in middle school. Somebody had even dusted the dresser recently because I could run my finger across the wood without picking anything up. For a while, I just sat there trying to figure out why I was home. I knew I lived somewhere else now, or at least I thought I did. My memory felt slippery, like waking up after taking cold medicine and trying to remember what day it is. I remember standing up too fast and getting dizzy for a second. That was when I noticed how quiet the house was. Not empty, exactly. I could hear movement downstairs, cabinets opening, a spoon hitting ceramic, normal sounds. But everything else felt muted somehow, like the house was absorbing noise. I went downstairs and found my mother in the kitchen making coffee. She turned around the second she heard me. Then she froze. I mean, completely froze. Mug halfway to the counter, eyes wide, like she genuinely hadn't expected to see me standing there. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she covered her mouth with her hand and started crying. Not loudly, just sudden tears. "Oh, thank God," she said quietly. I remember laughing a little, because I didn't know how else to react. "What's going on?" She walked over and hugged me so tightly it actually hurt a little. My mother was never physically affectionate when I was growing up. Even when I left for college, I think she hugged me for maybe 2 seconds before telling me to call when I arrived. This was different. She kept holding on to me even after I tried pulling away. "I missed you so much," she said. There was something strange about the way she said it.
more like somebody who had been rehearsing a sentence in their head for a long time and finally got to say it out loud. I asked her again why I was there. She wiped her face quickly and said she'd made tea. That was basically how the entire day went. Every time I asked a direct question, she answered with something else. She kept bringing up old memories while we sat in the living room together, things I hadn't thought about in years. The time I got stung by a jellyfish on vacation and cried because I thought part of my leg was missing. The stray cat I hid in the garage for almost a month before she found it. My first day of kindergarten when I wrapped both arms around her leg and refused to let go. "You were so little," she said quietly, almost smiling to herself. "I remember thinking I could still carry you anywhere." At one point, she started crying again while stirring sugar into her tea. That caught my attention because my mother never drank tea with sugar. She used to complain it ruined the taste. I noticed something else, too. She barely touched her own cup all afternoon, but she kept watching me drink mine. Not constantly, just enough for me to notice after a while. I remember asking if she was okay, and she immediately asked if I remembered the drive home. "The drive from where?" I asked. She stared at me for a second too long before looking down at her cup. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I thought maybe you would remember." That answer bothered me more than it should have. I kept trying to think backward through my memory, but everything after a certain point became foggy. I could remember work earlier in the week. I could remember being tired recently. I could even remember stopping for gas somewhere. After that, nothing. Every now and then, little pieces tried surfacing. Rain against a windshield, a headache, the feeling of being extremely cold. Then it would disappear again before I could hold on to it. By evening, I started noticing how tired my mother looked. Not physically tired, more like somebody who hadn't slept in days. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook every time she picked something up. Once, while she was in the kitchen, I caught her staring at me from the doorway with this expression I still can't really describe properly. Not fear, not guilt exactly. More like grief mixed with relief. Like she was glad I was there, but knew it couldn't last. At one point, she sat beside me on the couch and grabbed my hand. "I need you to know I loved you," she said.
Not love. Love, past tense. I remember staring at her after she said that, because suddenly the room didn't feel familiar anymore. I started noticing little details I hadn't paid attention to before. The untouched tea beside her. The way she kept looking at my face like she was trying to memorize it. Then I noticed the smell coming from my cup. Bitter almonds. Very faint, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop smelling it. I looked down at the tea in my hands, and suddenly, something opened up in my head all at once. I remembered my mother crying in the kitchen earlier that night. I remembered asking if she was okay. I remembered her saying she was just tired. Then I remembered the taste of the tea after the second sip. After that, I remembered lying on the couch, unable to move my arms properly, while she held my head against her chest and cried into my hair. "I'm sorry," she kept whispering. "I'm so sorry." The next thing I knew, I was standing in a line with hundreds of other people. Nobody around me looked confused. They all just stood there quietly beneath this dull grey sky that never seemed to get brighter or darker. A woman standing in front of me turned around and looked at me for a second. "First visit?" she asked. I couldn't answer. She nodded like she already knew. "It's easier when they love you," she said quietly. Then she looked down at my hands. "You still remember the tea?" That was the moment I understood where I was. And the worst part is, even after remembering everything, part of me still felt sorry for her.
If this story gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe, because the next one might be even worse.